All right, so the next headline, the main headline is how will new ruling on social media censorship impact the 2024 election? From the right, and this is a far right, from the New York Post opinion piece, Biden administration thinks it has divine right to nix conservatives' free speech rights. From the center, court ruling prompts fears of, quote, wild west of disinformation. And from the left, this is more of a center left from the New York Times, ruling puts social media at crossroads of disinformation and free speech. So on most of these, I'm not going to read the entire article because that would just be boring. But I will start reading and kind of skim and read the following, parts that I think are pertinent. But I'm telling you where to get the articles so you can read them yourselves. Again, this is from the All Sides News app, which is free, by the way. Following a judge's order that Biden administration officials can't push social media companies to censor, quote, content containing protected free speech, voices across the spectrum are speculating on the implications for the 2024 and beyond. Coverage from The Hill quoted supporters and opponents of the judge's order. It quotes Senator Eric Schmidt, Republican from Montana, calling the ruling a, quote, huge win for the First Amendment and a blow to censorship. It also quotes Darrell West, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute's Center for Technology Innovation, warning of a, quote, wild west of disinformation heading toward the 2024 election season. And this is sort of the tragedy of what has befallen us through all of history up to this point. But for the most part, the pandemic, which is where a lot of this current fear of disinformation has come from. We have seen repeatedly, particularly during the pandemic in regards to COVID, that several dissenting voices were flat out not only, there wasn't only skepticism what they were saying, many were censored and deplatformed. And this is continuing today, although there have been outlets like YouTube that are now going to allow, not so much for the pandemic, but YouTube put out a statement, and I don't know verbatim what they said, but essentially is they're no longer going to censor content talking about the 2020 election. Presumably, totally presumption, presumably because it would appear that the left does want Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee because they probably figure they can beat him again. Sound strategy, depending on who you ask. But that is presumably why they want to allow this talk to continue, because it can hurt Trump among independents and more, particularly those more left-leaning and or anti-Trump. But the article continues, dangerous information. A New York Times analysis determined that, quote, that the quote government's actions at the heart of the case were intended largely as public health measures. If you say so. But reviewed by the judge, quote, through the filter of partisan culture wars. See, this is the kind of language that gets very frustrating because, so when one side does it, it's protecting people. When another side does it, it's censorship. And really? Rules for thee, not for me. And for the record, I will notate my bias. I like to think I'm pretty moderate, but if I do lean one way or another, probably lean a little right on most issues, with the exception of freedom, then I am always kind of a strict libertarian in that regard. And I don't like censorship, generally speaking. There's obvious exceptions to like censorship that makes sense, i.e. decency on all ages platforms. That kind of censorship, yes. But I think of that more as curation. The outcome of the continuing legal battle, the article stated, could, quote, shape the future of the First Amendment law and, quote, alter how far the government can go in trying to prevent and spread potentially dangerous information. That's the whole point of the First Amendment. Because if the government can say that information is dangerous, then they can censor it, or at least that's what they're hoping for. The whole point of the First Amendment is to be able to ensure the right to free speech, no matter how crazy it sounds. Because where does it end? Are we going to start saying what news outlets are allowed to report certain things? An opinion piece in the New York Post opinion asked, quote, when did the Biden administration become infallible with a divine right to nullify the free speech of conservatives? I think you might be focusing too much on conservatives there, because theoretically, if they can nullify free speech of conservatives, they can nullify free speech of anyone. The article outlined efforts by the Biden administration and federal agencies to remove posts from accounts from social media sites determining, quote, federal censorship tainted the 2020 and 2022 elections, spurring the suppression of millions of social media posts, almost all from conservatives. In this particular case, yes, but again, that power would enable them to effectively censor anyone's speech. So very interesting. I guess we will see, although I agree with the court's decision in this particular one. It stands to reason that if you're not going to allow, and I don't understand how you could even fathom in the United States of America, a sitting administration, regardless if they're Republican or Democrat, to have the ability to curate and censor information online is just flat out anti-American. So it surprises me that people are surprised of this ruling. It's simply upholding the First Amendment.